Arcade Heroes.
Greetings, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and I'm giving another shot at this particular video. I've been trying to do a video about this article since it was published last week, but a number of issues, particularly where my desktop PC crashed while I was uploading a video that I had already edited together about this. Crashed because I plugged this USB microphone in while I was trying to get it to work on Discord because it wasn't working for some reason, and it wrecked the registry, and now Windows doesn't want to work no matter what I've tried. But anyways, as it says on the headline, pinball is booming in America and thanks to nostalgia and canny marketing. And it is not a super long article, although it is mostly behind a paywall. I did find the full article published elsewhere because lots of people in the pinball community have been sharing the details. But it gets into, well, they went to Logan Arcade, which is a pretty well-known arcade, famous arcade in the Chicago area. They have a lot of pinball, although I can't remember off the top of my head how many pinball machines they happen to have. And so usually when you think of arcades in the Chicago area, Galloping Ghost always pops up first, but then Logan Arcade is close behind, and talks about how there was a downturn in pinball. But after this part here, that's where they talk with Zach Sharp at Stern Pinball. He mentions that their sales have seen an increase of 15 to 20% since 2008, and it also quotes a guy who was a pinball collector who sounded like he was setting up a route with his pinball machines or an arcade, although they didn't specify what the name of his business was or anything. And they also mentioned the pinball bans at the very end of the article. Overall, I'm very happy to see a positive article come along that has anything to do with the amusement industry. I mean, pinball is kind of a niche within the niche of the arcade industry, and so it oftentimes has separate marketing and feels almost like a separate market, but of course, it still is a coin-operated product, and it still works in arcades. I think that any arcade you go to should have pinball if you want to call it or define it as a real arcade. And I've done several videos about this before, and so where I take issue, and the only thing I really take issue with, is that as this headline posits the notion that there is this boom going on, that there's a lot of hype driving it, the nuance in that is that the hype is only happening really within the collector market, the home market. And now over the years I've heard Stern, I've heard others within that, or other manufacturers I should say that a lot of their sales go to homes. And back when I used to sell arcade equipment, pinball machines were included with that, and I can remember oftentimes any day that a new pinball machine was announced, I would get phone calls about it. And I remember selling a Hulk LE, which was for, I think, the Avengers, the first Avengers, and sold that within minutes of the announcement coming along of that particular model. But it was to a home user. And now it's been many years. I don't have my notes or records anymore of all my sales, but from what I recall, most of the time when I would sell a pinball machine, it would go to a home user and not to a business. And now this has also changed after the pandemic, where when the lockdowns took place, Stern still saw really good sales, really strong sales, because a lot of people who were locked down at home wanted to have something different than, say, Netflix or their Xbox to play on, and so people that had money invested it into pinball machines. And so while the last time that I heard Stern throw out a number of the split between home and commercial sales was 40%, that was pre-pandemic, I wouldn't be surprised if that's gone up quite a bit since. And that's, I guess, again, where the issue is as an arcade operator. I saw this article posted on LinkedIn, and I put a comment there saying, I wish this would translate into better earnings on location. And somebody that I know very well from Stern replied to me on that, and he did make a good point as far as his point was that pinball still has great resale value. And that is true, that's not wrong. It's just the problem with looking at pinball as this investment piece for a commercial location is that my bills are not paid on a month-to-month basis. Wages and taxes and insurance and electrical and rent and paying myself and all that by something that I might sell years down the road. It's done by what the arcade is making right now and on a day-to-day basis. And so while it is totally a valid argument to say that, yes, pinball holds its value much better than anything else in the arcade industry, like even Pac-Man machines or Raw Thrills machines or anything else really, air hockey tables, all that stuff, it's still just not the best argument, I think, to be making in favor of pinball. Now, what I would prefer, and this is something like all this stuff I'm going to talk about, I've talked about before in other pinball videos, so I may sound like a broken record if you've already seen those, but the reason why I still have pinball, even though it's a pretty lousy earner, is that it draws people in to my location that otherwise might overlook it. And so it adds value to the location in an overall general sense, while it doesn't earn very well on its own. And that's the one thing that I want to see change with pinball. I want to see pinball make more money, and I wish, again, that this boom in pinball interest would translate. Now, why isn't it translating for locations like mine? Now, of course, you may be saying, well, they quoted Logan Arcade there. Logan Arcade seems to be doing great with pinball machines, and yes, that's true. It's just there is this nuance there where pinball has different performance based upon where it's located. So if you have pinball out in the Chicago area, just the general culture of Chicago has always been super, super supportive of pinball, and I mean that's where all the manufacturers are at pretty much. And so even Jersey Jack, which started in New Jersey, have moved their facilities over to the Chicagoland area. And so American Pinball as well is there, and so it's just that there's this cultural thing where pinball just performs better in Chicago, and another area in the United States where it's historically performed better than the average would be northwestern areas of the United States, like Seattle, Portland, places like that. But where I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, there are pinball fans, and again, it doesn't do the worst out of all the equipment that I have in here, but it also is nowhere near the best either. And as I've also mentioned recently, that by my calculations, pinball tends to take 8 to 10 years to pay itself off, whereas with your video arcade machines, they can be as low as 6 months or as high as 2 years. It's very rare, unless it's a total dud, that a video game will take more than 2 years to pay itself off. And another reason why 2 years has become more common is just the size and the price of the machines has skyrocketed quite a bit. There's a lot more games now that cost above $20,000 or even $30,000 a pop than there were, say, 10 years ago, and so that's driven it up. So getting off my tangent there and getting back to the question of why is it that pinball is booming in America, but it doesn't seem to be translating over to good sales in the arcade or good earnings in the arcade. I think it comes back to this weird thing that exists just in pinball, but not so much with video games, with the collector market. And that is where a lot of collectors, and I'm not saying all of them, I know there are several collectors who come to my spot where they're actually not really collectors. They're pinball fans. They're pinball wizards. They'll compete in tournaments, but they don't actually have machines at their house. And I can understand why. Getting into pinball becomes very expensive very quickly. And so while you can find a machine out there that might be under $1,000, its condition may not be great, or it may be a theme that you don't really care for, something from the 60s or the 70s that just isn't very fun. Something like that just nobody wants, and that's why it's cheap. But all the games that people really want and crave, like Addams Family and Twilight Zone and Monster Bash and Medieval Madness, etc., those are always in such high collector demand that their values are also very high too. But regardless, most of the collectors out there, if they have pinball in their house, they have little incentive to come to a business like mine and play pinball, unless I happen to have a game that they really, really like, and maybe they don't have it at their house, they don't want to get it at their home for whatever reason, and so they'll come to a place like mine, but that's very infrequent. On a day-to-day basis, the majority of customers that I see are casual players that are just walking through the mall, and they'll come in, just find things that they're interested in, and that might be pinball, but more often than not, it's not pinball. The only thing that might appeal to a casual person who barely knows what pinball is or doesn't know what it is would be the theme. But that's also kind of a roll of the dice. Not every theme that I have is going to appeal to everybody out there. And so, of course, you want to have more pinball to be able to attract people in that sense. But then again, when you look at pinball's performance on location, you don't want to invest too much into pinball because you're going to waste space on games that earn poorly, where you could use that space with better earners. And so it just becomes this kind of strange setup that is difficult to make decisions on because you just don't know what is going to do well. And again, I've tried different brands of pinball machines. I've tried technologically advanced pinball machines like Dialed In, Stranger Things Premium, and no difference was seen in the earnings on those. In fact, Dialed In was the worst performing new pinball machine I've ever owned, which really sucks for me. I wanted it to do well. That's why I spent the extra money on it. And I mean, all the Jersey Jack ones cost extra. And Stranger Things, I just was surprised by how poorly it did. And now maybe that's down to the design of it and the flow of everything, but still that projection mapping was really awesome. That was a great implementation of an idea. It's just it did not draw anybody into the game any more so than my Mandalorian Pro did. In fact, I traded my Stranger Things for a Mandalorian, and I know some of you out there might be screaming why. But again, from a business perspective, the Mandalorian, it made pretty much the same money that a Stranger Things Premium did, and even though it has fewer bells and whistles. And that's, again, very frustrating for a business where you need to make money to keep the doors open, and you can't just constantly invest into equipment that's not making its keep or not earning its keep. And so that becomes a real issue. Now, is there a way to solve this? Is there a way where we could appeal to casuals and keep them playing more? Because one issue that I have noticed over the years is that for many of these casuals that don't know what pinball is, they will plunk some coins into it to play it because the theme interests them, but they don't understand what's going on. They don't want to read a wall of text that's on the card. In fact, they don't even notice that most of the time. And they just bash the flippers and the ball drains, and then they think that's it. And they don't realize or don't care that they have 3 balls, and they walk away. In fact, you might have come across some pinball machines out there that are sitting there not being played and are on ball 2. That generally means that somebody walked away from the machine after just one play, and I see that all the time. Now, in the past, with the other videos where I've discussed this, people have suggested, well, you should be a bar, and I've explained why that doesn't really work for me, or that I should have a free play model. And I've also have another video where I did talk to other operators out there who do pinball, including those who do the free play model, and most of them, not all of them, but most of them do charge for the pinball. So you're paying for admission where everything's on free play but the pinball machines. You still need quarters to play the pinball machines, and even in that instance, the pinball machines, from what they told me, still don't do that great. In fact, one arcade called The Arcade, which is in Wichita, Kansas, they said that their skee ball outperforms pinball all the time, and like 2, 3, or 4 times as much money is made by a skee ball machine than a pinball machine. So is there a solution to this? Well, I think so, but again, I could be totally wrong. And that's where I think that pinball needs to take some lesson or learn some lessons from game design when it comes to video games. And what I mean is that we need a tutorial mode for casuals. Now, I know that hardcore pinball players would probably bristle at that notion, and I think the easy solution is that you make the tutorial skippable, because obviously if you know what pinball is, you don't need some condescending little tutorial telling you how to play every single time that you start the game, and so that should be an easy way to skip that. But for the casual person who walks up to a pinball machine, the only thing they know about it is the theme. Again, they are not going to learn it just by bashing the flippers. In fact, that's not satisfying for most people. That's why most walk away. Yes, once in a blue moon, you might get somebody where they're so intrigued by what they see that they stick around and they start figuring it out. But most customers are not going to do that. And so if you had the machine being the teacher and telling the player how it works, then I think the chances would improve of somewhat lassoing people into being interested in pinball. And I mean, video games do this. The tutorials are skippable in video games, but oftentimes the tutorials are pretty stupid. I mean, here's how you walk, here's how you jump in a game, or use WASD for moving around in a first-person shooter, stuff like that. And as a lifelong gamer, that again feels so dumb, and I hate it when I can't skip those types of tutorials. But the fact that pinball has not done anything quite like that, I mean, I should amend that. I know some games are kind of get there. I have a Terminator 3 by Stern, where when you start the game, it says shoot here, and it lights up the arrows showing you what ramps to shoot at. And so something like that is a great thing that, again, all pinball machines should do that to some degree. But if you had a tutorial teacher mode that could tell any casual what it is that they're supposed to do, then I think that would, again, improve the chances. And again, it should be skippable. Now, also, to be fair, I know Stern Pinball has some sort of tutorial video that does play during the attract modes on their machines. It's just, it doesn't say anything to the player. It's just all visual. And the only problem with that is that a lot of people just don't pay attention to that, because one issue with pinball, again, is that it's so busy. There's so much going on. There's so many blinking lights that it becomes kind of a sensory overload, and so they're not going to necessarily pay attention to a little video that's on the screen, because they're also trying to figure out what's going on here and here and here and here, and oh look, there's that one thing that I know from Star Wars or Jurassic Park or whatever that's painted on the playfield. And so again, the game has to interact with the player. It has to talk to them, and this is essentially something that some of you had suggested to me. It's just, this wouldn't be tenable for me to do. And that suggestion was, you should have somebody who can teach people how to play pinball. It's just, right now, this is about 12:36 in the afternoon on a Monday at my arcade, and now I have a lot of my machines off. I have some of them on because I did have some customers in here earlier, but they showed no interest in pinball, and so I'm keeping my pinball off, which is a bit of a power hog, and oops. But I keep that off until there's somebody interested in it. But I can't hire somebody who would know how to play pinball and how to teach pinball to people to sit here for 11 to 13 hours a day, depending on the day, hoping that somebody will come in and they don't know what pinball is and that they could rope them into that. There's no way that would be worth its while. I have my doubts that even at the Pinball Hall of Fame that would be worth the while of having a teacher there and paying them for that. I mean, maybe you could find somebody out there that would be willing to just sit there like an intern in an unpaid thing and just sit there bored to tears until somebody shows up that doesn't know what pinball is. But again, that just makes no sense. What makes more sense, or makes any sense, would be for the machine itself to sell itself, to be on the theme and to teach the player, this is how you play me. And again, the rule cards, that doesn't work. Not for casuals. It works for pinball wizards that already know how to play pinball and everything, but for everybody else, again, it's just a wall of text and you're not going to pay attention to it. So that's my thought as to how pinball could improve and to possibly rope more players in. Just again, it has to talk. There has to be voice. So if those stern tutorial videos actually talked to players, or like say you had a camera on the machine to detect when somebody came by and was looking at the machine and could say, hey, do you want to know how this works? Hold the flipper buttons or something like that, and then it launches a tutorial so that they could learn what the game does or how it works, or when the insert coins, that it would start telling you what to do unless you pushed something or held down a button like the action button or something like that, so that if you're a pinball wizard you could skip that already and just go. But let me know what you think as to these thoughts about this idea as to what can maybe help pinball perform better, because again, as I've mentioned in many other videos, just all the things that have been thrown out as good suggestions aren't always tenable or viable. Not everybody can be a bar arcade, but even then, from the evidence I've found, being a bar doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to have success with pinball and that it's going to perform better than, say, a video game would or a skee-ball machine would. And so that indicates to me that the problems with pinball and how it's presented to the players, and not just the business model that's at work around it. But again, if you disagree, feel free to throw your own thoughts in there, or what else might work to draw more casuals in and help them out. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video, hopefully where I have a working PC again.